Good evening, welcome to Central News for Thursday 25th of July. I'm Amy Forrest. In today's news, people eligible for a free influenza immunisation have less than a month left to be vaccinated before the government subsidised campaign ends on 31st of July. This season has already been a record breaker for the Waikato, with 94,020 residents already vaccinated compared to last year. That's an increase of more than 22,000 vaccinations in our region. Medical Officer of Health says to get in quick before the 31st of July, as it may seem the flu season is over, but there are still a few months of a cold winter ahead.
Well, the free vaccine runs out. The free vaccine finishes on the 31st of July, so we've only got a few days left now to go and get that vaccine. And obviously, from all the things that we all discussed, is that it's really important for to be able to offer that protection for a disease that can be severe in quite a lot of people.
Waikato Regional Council is celebrating 5 years of their Hamilton Halo project by having a photo competition. Hamilton Halo has successfully involved rat and possum control at key bird breeding sites around Hamilton to encourage tui and other native birds back to the city. Biodiversity Officer Therese Balvert says the competition is for any resident to take a photo of either a tui, bellbird, kaka or kereru and upload it to their website with detail of where and what the bird was doing.
Well, for the month of July, Hamilton Halo are running a photo competition, and what we're after is people's best snaps of their tui, bellbird or kereru. This is the third time we've run it and we get really good results from it, and so far this year's looking to be as positive as other years. This year we've used the photo competition to launch Biosecurity Month. Biosecurity Month also runs for the month of July, and the Halo competition was highlighting how biosecurity is necessary for biodiversity.
Now for our region's weather. Hamilton, your Friday is becoming fine with a high of 14 and a low of 3. And Tauranga, the sun is out for you on Friday, making way for a great weekend ahead. Your high is 15 with a low of 6. Just ahead, biosecurity in the Bay. Welcome to Central News on TV Central. July is Biosecurity Month. We have chatted with the Waikato Regional Council about botanic pests for that region. Tonight, Hilary finds out what are pestful plants in the Bay.
How is the biosecurity risk at the port managed?
So that's primarily a responsibility of the Ministry for Primary Industries. They're responsible for surveillance and control of new incursions if it's deemed feasible. So they have a surveillance program currently nationally in a lot of the ports, and they use a research institute called NIWA to do a lot of the monitoring. So they'll do an annual survey. If a new incursion is identified, they will go through a feasibility study to basically see whether it is, logistically possible to control the new incursion. If they decide that it isn't, then it's up to us to again decide whether it's a risk that we need to manage. Currently we're not managing any aquatic marine pests, but that's not to say in the future that if something does rear its head that we won't put management plans in place.
What are the priority pest plants in the Bay of Plenty?
So from the exclusion and eradication category, the two main ones we're dealing with at the moment are Ngora burr, which is an agricultural pest that is mainly confined to maize crops. It's a prolific seeder, so when you have infestations within a maize crop, it's difficult to get the seed base down low enough, so you go in and do manual control, and next year, obviously the new generation of plants. It's easily spread through machinery, so that's one of the big challenges we're facing, is ensuring that machinery that go into these areas are decontaminated sufficiently and don't spread it around the region. Another big one is alligator weed. So alligator weed is one that can have both a terrestrial and an aquatic form. It spreads through fragmentation, so if a plant's disturbed, fragments drift downstream, they can re-establish. And also Spartina, which is a coastal plant that likes estuarine, just above high tide estuarine areas. It's quite invasive, and obviously when you're doing control around coastal areas, there are some significant restrictions on what you can and can't do. From a containment plant perspective, woolly nightshades extremely widespread in the region, and it's something that's quite controversial. We're looking to be more proactive in that approach. Not to say that we haven't been proactive in the past, but we're probably going to have to take more of a compliance approach and be quite strategic in how we approach the infestation, particularly around the Tauranga Katikati area. So, and wild kiwifruit currently is an issue because with the spread of PSA, it's a potential vector. So we're working very closely with industry to try and control them around the region.
So which of these plants are the biggest threat?
It's difficult to identify one single large threat. I mean, a lot of the species, if left unchecked, could become the next big weed. Probably one at the forefront at the moment is wild kiwifruit because of the risk with PSA. So it's something that's certainly a big priority for us, and we're working very closely with the industry to try and control infestations. And obviously with the economic implications of PSA, the reality is a lot of people are walking off orchards, so we have an abandoned orchard problem, and that can potentially exacerbate the problem.
So is wild kiwifruit literally wild kiwifruit vines?
It's kiwifruit that is allowed to grow uncontrolled. So it's quite a vigorous plant, and if you choose not to prune it annually, it can climb and smother trees, valleys, etc. It's extremely successful plant.
How can landowners identify these pests, and what resources are available to them?
Yeah, the internet's a wonderful tool. There's plenty of information on the internet. We have documents within the regional council, such as a user guide to pests in the Bay of Plenty region. It's a useful document in the fact that it has lots of nice glossy photos, so it gives people, I guess, an indication of what a species may look like. Failing that, make contact with council staff. Will be more than willing to come out to your property and identify. We have contractors that are continuously going around the region looking for our priority plants and plants under the RPMP. So a lot of landowners should get a letter in the mail basically identifying what's in the property and what they should be controlling.
If we do see one of these pest plants in our backyard, do you want us just to rip them out, or does the council want to know about them?
It depends on the plant really. If you can identify it yourself, then we certainly encourage landowners to be proactive in control of pest plants. But in saying that, we identify that not everybody has the skills or education to be able to identify something, so we're certainly more than willing to help. Supporting landowners is a big part of our job, and we're more than willing to do that, so by all means come into the office or give us a call.
And I mean, some of those pest plants, alligator weed, you mentioned it can be actually spread by fragment. Is that something, there must be some that have to be dealt with more professionally?
Yeah, I mean, many of the plants do have to be dealt with professionally. I mean, in some cases we're dealing with chemicals that you need certain licences to use, and if you're doing control over water or on coastal areas, you may need resource consent. So if you are unsure, then by all means give us a call. Some of the more terrestrial based weeds, landowners are capable of controlling themselves with products that are readily available from your farmlands and RD1. We also can provide products over the counter to people if they are unsure, and so we encourage them to make contact with us.
Sea lettuce causes quite an uproar usually. So is that actually a pest plant?
No, sea lettuce is a naturally occurring algae. The reason it's become an issue recently, research suggests, is because of the unusual El Nino patterns that we're currently in the middle of, and it's an unfortunate nuisance, but it's certainly not a pest and not something we'll ever manage under the RPMP.
You can view photos of pest plants on their website, boprc.gov.nz. Coming up next, the Country Music Awards. Welcome back. The National Country Music Awards are coming up on Saturday, 17th of August, and a big international act is coming. Hilary found out more.
So welcome to the program. Now, Grace, tell us about these Country Music Awards.
Well, Hilary, this is the 7th year we've had the annual National Country Music Awards in Hamilton at the Founders Theatre, and they're held every year to promote the upcoming young artists, to have some of the older professional artists come, and we always have a Legend Award, which is given to somebody who's really done a lot for country music over the years. This year is the first year we're having an international star, and it's very exciting for us, and we're having Juice Newton from the USA.
So tell us about her. What's she done?
Well, she, way back in the 80s, I would think it would have been, she had some very big hits. Queen of Hearts, Angel of the Morning. Anybody in my age will know of them, and I'm sure most young ones will have heard the songs at least.
Yeah, they ring a bell to me. So this is the 7th year that you guys have had it. So what are the different categories that you have?
A very important part of our show is our Horizon Award, which we have each year, and we choose about 3 or sometimes 4 young up-and-coming artists, New Zealand artists, who are wanting to break into the professional part of country music. And they are chosen on the night by a panel, including people like Gray Bartlett, who's part of our show. And they get a trip to Tamworth out of that. This year they're getting a lovely Maton guitar presented to them, and they also go to Nashville, don't they, Jenny?
Yes, they do. And they go to Nashville in June of the following year, and they get to perform on the Global Artist stage in Nashville, which is, there's a big place called The Stage, and they get to perform there. And this year we've been on the same day that Jodie performed, who was our last year's winner, Jodie Doreen. We had our 2010 nominee, winner, Kaylee Bell, back singing because she won the big award in Australia. So she was a special guest back on that stage. So on that night we had 2 New Zealanders on that huge stage.
Wow, in Nashville, that sounds pretty
It's
good.
great. It's really wonderful, and these people, they just go from strength to strength.
Speaking of New Zealand country music hitting international kind of level, how big is country music in New Zealand?
Oh, it's growing all the time, and there is such a big, wide variety of genres of country music now. I mean, a lot of the younger ones sing across country rock, contemporary country. Country music is certainly changing as we knew it. And perhaps back in my day, doesn't seem to be a lot in the way of Western attached to country these days, but certainly what's being written by these young talented people and what's being performed is wonderful, and a very big range.
So it's moved from that ye olde
Oh,
Dolly
absolutely.
Parton.
Although there's still a place for that sort of thing, but it doesn't seem to be coming through at the moment. As I say, it's definitely a changing genre.
You might be surprised at some of the songs that you think are quite out there, but they are actually classified as country.
Really? I suppose there's a lot. I mean, there was the Cause and that kind of thing. They were kind of bordering on country.
Yes.
You know, and yeah.
Marianne Lambert, all of her stuff, and yeah. And hey, you just got to look at some of those country boys, and they're very good, real studs there. So.
Might get into country music then.
Well, yes.
So, getting back to our New Zealand talent, are we making a big, are we making it on that international stage, apart from those 2 that you just mentioned before?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, the young ones especially are just moving straight out there. We've got young Kylie Price on our show, who was only 19, and already, she's been picked up by somebody. She's doing lots of tours both in New Zealand. I'm sure she's part of the Gympie Awards in Australia. In fact, we've got a New Zealand showcase for the first time on the Gympie Awards, which is the weekend after our show. So that's a real coup for New Zealand to have their own showcase. And several of the people like Kaylee Bell and other ones on our show are actually going to be part of that too.
Ellie Cook is she is the New Zealand ambassador for that there, and she's going over, and so it should be. It's actually, if you look at a majority of our people that are on our show are actually going over there to that show, and.
It's very exciting, it's just taken everything up another level, and I think having Jess Newton come over this year is just going to make it so much easier for us in the future to get really good overseas artists and to keep building up on our event.
So, I mean, you've pretty much got the top New Zealand people performing at the awards anyway, yeah?
Yes.
So run us through the program. What can we expect on the night?
Well, first of all, we have we've got our Chris Powley as our MC. Of course, he's a singer in his own right, so it's always nice to have somebody who's in that industry. The program is with Horizons, 3 Horizons. We've got Josh, you might have to help me, Jenny. Joshua Gray.
Joshua Gray is a Hamiltonian and comes from out Temple View there. You've got Cameron Scott from way down in Cave in the South Island there. It's a little town just out from probably closer to Timaru than there. And then we've got David Shanahan, who's is doing very well in Auckland. He's, you know, he's making his way as a singer full time, and he was we've actually brought him back because a few years ago he was one of our Horizons, and it was that year that they were very close, and only one person can win. So it's when you've got a talent like that, you've got to bring them back and see how they get on.
Up next, the controversial Black Swan cull. If you have just joined us, welcome to Central News. Tonight we have part 2 of our interview with Eastern Fish and Game about the controversial Black Swan cull on Tauranga Harbour.
Black swan is a game bird under the Wildlife Act, but it is it's subject to the Conservation Minister's notification. So why is the Ministry supporting that hunt in Tauranga?
The black swan is a game bird under what we call a schedule. That is to say, it's classed as a bird that can be hunted, and I think that goes back to what we've talked about, the numbers. The black swan has an interesting history. It disappeared for a while. It was hunted extensively in early settler days, and in fact, early Maori hunted the black swan for food, and it did die out. And then it reintroduced itself sometime later, possibly flying over in some, high-level currents from Australia, but it did die out for a while. But I think it's just one of those native birds that are huntable, and because of the numbers, obviously, it's not in any sort of endangered situation.
So it is a native bird?
It is definitely a native bird, although some people aren't aware of that.
Because there has been reports of them causing quite a bit of trouble at the airport too. Tell us about that.
The black swan lives further down the harbour away from the airport. I can't comment specifically on the bird strike problem because, that's a matter more for the airport officials. And usually when birds cause a problem at airports, it's because they're flying across the airport, say to reach a food source. We're not aware of the black swan doing that, and I think there are other bird species that cause Tauranga Airport more of an issue. But certainly the airport authorities have been quoted in the past as voicing some concern if the numbers of black swan grew to a certain point. So I guess if you went and spoke to them, they'd probably say that they'd be happy to see some controls on black swan. And indeed, something I didn't mention earlier, that Fish and Game is taking a fresh look at managing black swan in Tauranga Harbour because of, I guess, the small numbers that have been shot by the hunters in recent years.
Pukeko is another native species. It's allowed to be hunted. So why are we allowed to hunt that one?
If you look around, you'll see, especially if you drive the expressway towards the toll plaza, you'll note the number of pukeko that's perhaps exploded is too strong a word, but they've certainly grown in number. Around Tauranga Harbour, you've got the situation where a lot of land has been built on in areas that were previously swamp, wetland, and it's a situation where, as our bird expert says, people have ended up in pukeko's backyard, not the other way round. And so pukeko have become something of a problem for local residents in some of these new subdivisions around the harbour, and they're invading people's gardens. They've long been a problem for quite a few farmers, where they'll even go and peck open a bale of silage. As I think you well know, the media have turned the pukeko into quite a cutesy animal and given it a very friendly sort of a look. And the reality is somewhat different, that the pukeko actually does nasty things to some other birds. It will peck the eggs of other birds, step on their eggs, and indeed attack the young. So the image is really not what it seems. So as a game bird that can be hunted, through that particular period of time, we'd like to see it hunted more to keep the numbers under control, and in view of the number of complaints that come our way from commercial growers, farmers, and, as I say, members of the public who have pukeko getting into their gardens and, attacking their vegetables, as it were.
What gives us that right? I mean, if it's the bird's backyard first, what gives us that right to make it our backyard?
I think, where do you draw the line with these native birds if they're causing issues? We all want to see native birds preserved, and Fish and Game is no different on that score. But one thing we do is a lot of wetland enhancement and development, and we like to see birds breeding in those areas. But in the urban area, do they have a place?
Are swan and pukeko nice to eat, or are they kind of more hunted for their feathers?
They're both, I believe, quite edible. There's an old joke about the pukeko as a so-called swamp hen. You take a rock and you boil the rock with the pukeko, and then you throw away the bird and eat the rock. But in fact, at the Wild Food Festival and down south, Fish and Game served up a lot of pukeko that was barbecued after being marinated, and it was apparently extremely popular. I can't speak for the swan. I haven't eaten it, and I've eaten other game birds and pretty delicious wild game. But the same thing again, you can breast the swans and cook them in various ways, and anyone who wants to can Google and find some of those recipes.
That is the news for today. We really want you to be involved, so like us on Facebook and let us know your views. If you have any news, including your own video or photos, go to our website and hit upload. Thanks for joining us. Hilary will be back tomorrow night with more guests from in and around the region. I'm Amy Forrest. Have a wonderful evening.
This has been an Alpha Media production, a division of Television Media Group.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.